So we're going to play Kemet Blood and Sand. Come on back after the break. Hey everybody, welcome to the show Board Game Reviews. This is a YouTube channel dedicated to the board gaming hobby, and this is part of a series of videos looking at the game of Kemet Blood and Sand. Now in this specific video, I'm going to teach you how to actually play the game. Although if all you're interested in though is a quick overview, seeing some gameplay or an actual review of the game, check out the other videos in the series. This is going to be a complete tutorial video from start to finish, from setup to all the way going through the complete gameplay. But the big question is, what exactly is Kemet? Kemet is an area control game for 2 to 5 players where players are competing in a fantastical version of Egypt to be the first person to start their turn with 9 victory points. The first person to start their turn with 9 victory points is going to be the grand winner, take control of the Nile Empire, while all the other players are going to suffer defeat. Now the interesting thing about the game of Kemet is the game does have permanent victory points, and that's temporary victory points. Permanent victory points, if you can lock them in, no player can take them away from you. But temporary victory points are fleeting as the sands of the desert themselves. If players can meet the condition for the temporary victory point, they can steal those temporary victory points away from you quite easily. And if they can hold on to them, again, if you start your turn with 9 victory points, or if multiple players have 9 or more victory points, as long as you start your turn with the most amount of victory points, 9 or more, you're going to be the grand winner of the game of Kemet. Now I know I said the game of Kemet comes with permanent victory points and temporary victory points. Well, how do you gain those victory points? Well, there's multiple ways to gain victory points in this game, and one of the most common ways to gain victory points in this game is through the acts of aggression. Because anytime you can attack another player and defeat that player, you're going to gain 1 permanent victory point. And again, these victory points cannot be taken away from you. They are permanent for your empire. Additionally, on top of that, you're going to gain victory points for doing things such as raising your temples and your pyramids to level 4. Again, this is a temporary condition though, and as long as you can hold on to that temple, you're going to manage to keep those victory points. But if somebody moves in and steals that temple from you, or that pyramid from you I should say, they're going to steal those victory points from you. As long as they can lock down that pyramid and prevent you from gaining it back, that player is going to lock down those victory points, stealing those victory points directly from you. Players can also lay claim to temporary victory points by controlling the various temples out here on the board. But again, these are fleeting victory points unless at the end of a day you can control 2 or more of these temples. If you can control 2 or more of these temples, then you turn those temporary victory points into permanent victory points along with those temporaries, allowing those victory points to compile together, meaning that you're putting a big old bullseye right on your forehead because all their players realize that you're coming very close to winning the game. Finally, the other way to gain a victory point, and this is a victory point, is by sacrificing your units to the gods at the Sanctuary of All Gods. Now, generally that does require you to take 2 of your units to sacrifice them, but if you can sacrifice those 2 units, that's going to be a permanent victory point for you and your armies by sacrificing them at the Sanctuary, locking those permanent victories for your empire. Now the basic game of Kemet is a area control game, and it's an action selection game where players are going to, on their turn, they're going to take turns taking various different actions. Actions such as moving across the board, actions such as conscripting more units to add to the armies, because if you add those conscripts to your armies, maybe you can possibly take back your temples that have been stolen from you, or maybe just use them to move across the board after you take those different locations. You can also pray for power. Praying for power is going to allow you to pay for different things such as conscripting more units, elevating your temples, and also buying these power tiles, which are going to make the game more asymmetric, because these are permanent power tiles that give your empire permanent powers in this very fantastical game. The basic flow for the game though is going to be played over a day phase and a night phase. During the day phase, players are going to take turns one at a time playing 1 action disc and performing exactly what that action does, moving around the board until all the players finish taking all of their actions. Then we're going to move to the night phase, and during the night phase, players are going to gain more power by praying to the gods. They're going to gain victory points through the actions they manage to hold on to. If they manage to lock in some of these temples, maybe some powers are going to activate or other things are going to happen, and they may even be able to spend veteran tokens, and these veteran tokens will be used for things such as divine intervention cards, gaining power, or even conscripting more units into their armies. The game is going to continue to play over rounds until, again, like I said, 1 player can start their turn with 9 or more victory points. Again, the first person to do so is going to be the grand winner of the game of Kemet. To set up the game of Kemet, the first thing we need to do is figure out how many players we're playing for the game, because like any good area control game, the board is going to be shrunk down depending on the player count, because any good area control game wants lots of good player interaction. So the very first thing you're going to do is, if you are playing a 5-player game, you need to add the sandstorm right here to this region. This guarantees that there are exactly 5 different cities available for all the players to play, and every single one of these cities is broken down into 3 districts, which I'll explain in just a couple moments here. But for a 5-player game, we're simply going to cover this region over here. This region does not exist. It's for the eventual 6-player expansion, which is currently not available. Now, if you want to play the game as a 4-player game, you're going to need to add this cover right here, which is going to take out this city. These 4 are the starting cities for all of our players, again broken down into their individual districts. Now, if we're going to play a 3-player game, we are actually going to ignore this whole entire half of the board right over here, and the only half of the board that exists is everything on this side of the Nile River, including the sanctuary of all gods in this temple right up here. Now, if we want to break the game down even further into a 2-player game, we're simply going to add this card cover back onto the board. Again, the only thing that exists is this far side of the board only, including the sanctuary of the all gods and the Delta Temple. But this city right here does not exist. These are the only 2 cities that exist in a 2-player game. Again, broken down into the individual districts. This whole side of the map is completely ignored. Now, the Kemet board is broken down into multiple different areas, and every single one of these areas has a purpose. You have your temples, and a temple is anything that has this symbol right next to it, so it does mean the Delta Temple is also a temple. That's going to be very important when it comes to gaining your victory points at the end of every single day. Also, you have your standard areas, which are just basic regions. You have your cities, which are broken down into 3 individual districts, and every one of these districts can hold exactly 1 temple. Or correction, sorry, every single one of these districts can hold exactly 1 pyramid. Now, every single player is going to start with 3 pyramids, possibly, or 2 pyramids. We'll get into that when we get to that part of the setup. But just understand that every single player is going to have their own city, broken down into 3 individual districts, and every one of these districts is a zone. Every one of these spaces outside of your cities is another zone for movement. Every one of these temples is also their own zone for movement. And finally, there happens to be the sanctuary of all gods, which is its own little space. You're also going to have these little obelisks on the board right here, and every one of these obelisks allows you to do a teleport action. Explain that when we get to the actions itself. But just understand the board is broken up by the Nile River itself, the cities with their individual districts, individual locations, these obelisks that are used for teleportation, individual temples, which is anything with these symbols, and the sanctuary of all gods. On top of that, you're going to notice that there's harbors all across the board. Harbors are very important when it comes to movement, but the basic short version of it is these harbors are going to connect various different locations across the board. Basically, make sure that anybody on any turn is basically pretty much only 2 spaces from another player, judging by locations or by use of the harbors or even by use of the obelisks. Next up, players need to decide exactly which power tile is going to be involved in the game. Now, the basic game of Kemet comes with 4 power tiles. There is actually a 5th power tile that is available. That's an expansion. That's the green color power tiles. But the basic game itself is going to come with blue, white, red, and black power tiles. Now, before you start the game, you're going to pick a certain amount of these power tiles that are going to be available to all the players in this current game. The power tiles that are not picked for the current game are not going to be available to any of the players. And the amount of power tiles you can select is going to be based on the amount of players. So for a 2-player game, you're going to pick 2 of the 4 colors of power tiles that are going to be available for that game to all the players involved. For a 3 or 4-player game, you're going to pick 3 of the 4 colors of power tiles. That's going to be available to those 3 and 4 players only. The 4th color tile is going to be removed from the game. And then finally, in a 5-player game, you're going to have all 4 of the colored power tiles available. Of course, if you have that expansion, that means you do have a choice between the 5 different color tiles. But in a 5-player game, you're going to have access to 4 different colors of power tiles available for all the players to choose from. After we've picked out which color power tiles we have and we set up the board for our player count, the next thing we need to do is grab any combat cards that may be involved based on the power tiles we've selected. Place all the monsters out there on every individual power tile based on the monsters available, based on the power tiles we've selected for a game. Make sure you add 1 victory point counter on any one of the power tiles that do give 1 permanent victory point. Next, we'll pick every one of the temples that are currently on the board based on our player count. And we'll place out one of these temporary victory point tokens out there as a reminder that if we take control of that temple, that player takes control is going to gain 1 temporary victory point for doing so. Next up, every single player needs to take one of the blank Divine Intervention cards. And this Divine Intervention card is the bluffing card that we're going to use to play during combat potentially or other actions to bluff the actual use of a Divine Intervention card. There are 5 of them available in the game, and make sure you find the 5 of them and every single player gets exactly 1 of these Divine Intervention cards. Next up, you just need to simply shuffle Divine Intervention deck, and then we are going to move on to the next part of setup. Every single player then needs to take all the components in their specific color. They're going to take 1 token, which is used to denote their city that they're going to start with. This is going to be placed on the board. I'll show you where that goes in just a moment. Every single player is then going to take the tiles that represent which specific power tiles are available for this specific game. Now, since we're showing you how to play a two-player game here only, we're only going to use the black and the blue, and we're going to set both of these on our action board, denoting which temples that we are going to start with at the beginning of the game. Next up, every single player is going to take a round token, a prayer token, which is going to start on space number 7, because we all start with 7 prayer points at the start of the game. 5 action tokens. Every single player is going to start with a hand of 8 battle cards. Now, every single player starts with the exact same 8 battle cards. You know which battle card is yours by the color right here on every individual card, which is an arrow. Plus, if you look very closely at the artwork, you're going to see that the artwork specifically matches your faction. For example, since we're the red player in this example, we're going to have red shields, lots of red on every one of our individual cards here. But if you can't see the colors, just know that's going to be the slow symbol right here on your cards also. Next up, everybody has the distraction divine intervention card that we all start with. Plus, we're going to draw 2 extra divine intervention cards, which are going to be unknown to other players. These are going to form our hand. Every single player needs to start with their 3 temples, or in the case of a 2-player game, we only need to start with 2 temples. The other temple can be removed from the game. Finally, every one of our players is going to start with 12 individual units. Now, the interesting thing about a unit is a group of units is considered a troop. You can never have more than 5 units in a troop. Do you understand that monsters are never part of a troop, and you can only have 1 monster per total troop on the map? But up to 5, barring any power tiles that break the rules. And oh yes, there are power tiles that will break that rule. But beyond that, no more than 5 units can be part of a troop, and as long as you have 1 or more units, that is considered 1 troop. After our players have figured out what their starting cities are going to be by placing their statues in front of their cities, next thing we need to do is we need to randomize what the player order is going to be. And a simple, easy way to do it is just take the tokens and drop them down in player order. Or you can do it something funny like the person who most recently read a good book, or you can even use random.org, whatever you like to do. We just need to figure out what the player order is going to be. Next up, every single player needs to put 5 other units into one of each of the districts of the cities. You do have a total of 12 units. Remember, the remaining 2 units are going to go into your player supply, meaning that you can conscript them at a later date. Remember, the board is broken up. Every one of these cities is broken up into 3 individual districts. Each single district is going to get 5 units, which is going to form 1 troop in 2 of your districts. Next thing we need to do is we, as each individual player, need to make a decision on exactly how we want to start our pyramids at the start of the game. Now, you have a couple different decisions here because you can have a total of 3 levels worth of pyramids at the start of the game, but no pyramid can start greater than level 2. Your first option, and I'm going to show you this for a 3-player game, 4-player game, or 5-player game, is you start with all 3 of your pyramids, each starting individual, starting at level 1. The alternate option that you can choose is to start 1 pyramid at level 2, 1 pyramid at level 1, and your 3rd pyramid at level 0. Now, since we are playing a 2-player game here for our demonstration purposes, and we have a total of 3 levels of pyramid, no pyramid being greater than level 2, it's a pretty foregone conclusion that one of our pyramids is going to start at level 1, one of our pyramids is going to start at level 2, and that is what we need to do for our pyramid setup structure. The only thing left to do in reverse player order, so in this example, red will be first, is every single player in reverse player order is going to start selecting 1 power tile that they are going to start the game with. There's no cost involved. That is 1 free bonus power tile they get to start with. And again, this is in reverse player order. Now, in a 2-player game, it's pretty easy to figure out which power tiles you can choose from. But when we do have a 5-player game, which means there's 4 total colors of tiles available for every single player to choose from, you need to make sure that you're picking a color that you do have access to. So, for example, if we're playing a 5-player game and you have a red pyramid, a white pyramid, and a blue pyramid, that means at the start of the game you cannot pick one of the black starting power tiles. You need to pick one that you currently have an active pyramid for. Now, before we go any further into the instructional video, there's a couple core concepts you need to understand about the game of Kemet. The very first thing is that there, like I've said already, there are permanent victory points and there are temporary victory points. Now, the permanent victory points are permanent victory points for combat, permanent victory points for making sacrifices at the sanctuary of all gods, or by gaining the divine favor of the gods by gaining various different power tiles. There are also temporary victory points, and these are the circular victory points, such as raising a pyramid to level 4 and keeping control of that level 4 pyramid. Remember, you can steal these temporary victory points from other players, and also for currently gaining control and keeping control of a temple. Again, these are fluid victory points. They are temporary. They can be stolen from you. The square ones are permanent. Nobody can take them from you. The circular ones can be kept as long as you meet the condition for that specific victory points. Additionally, the cards in the game are going to have different ways that you can use them, because Kemet does play over a day phase and a night phase. Some cards are going to be played during the day phase, that's signified by the sunshine symbol on the specific card or the power tile, or it may have both symbols, the day phase or the night phase, signifying this card to be played during the day and the night phase. Next up, you're going to have cards that are going to be used as part of a move action. That's signified by the little movement icon. Some cards that are going to only be played with the combat action. And also, don't forget, some cards also have a cost and power. Whether it happens to be a power card, such as this one, which requires you to spend 4 prayer points to purchase it, or a card such as this, which requires you to spend 1 prayer point to activate the card. Additionally, if there's ever any rules conflicts in the game, just understand that divine intervention cards take precedence, then power cards take precedence, then any expansion rules take precedence, and then finally any rules in the rulebook. Because this is a game that does have some exceptions, especially created by the divine intervention cards and the power tile, so just understand when there's any rule conflicts, divine entry cards trump everything, power tiles trump everything except divine intervention, expansions trump the basic rules, and the rules, well, they are just the rules for the game. Now, the basic game of Kemet is going to be played out over rounds, and every single round is broken into a day phase and into a night phase, and every round starts with the day phase. During the day phase, players are going to take turns taking actions, and then during the night phase, players are going to potentially gain victory points, gain power, and possibly spend veteran tokens, and then the game is going to continue to play this round after round after round until a victor has been decided. On a player's turn, they need to spend 1 of their action tokens, and the way they're going to do that is simply take 1 of their action tokens and move to one of the various different actions they take, such as movement, such as conscripting, such as raising up levels of the pyramid, such as gaining power, or such as buying certain power tiles based on the action token that you select. Now, there's 2 caveats to spending action tokens on your turn. The first caveat to spending these action tokens is you need to spend at least 1 action token on every single one of the bottom 3 levels of your pyramid. So it does mean that you could not, by the end of your round, do something like this, because that's an illegal amount of movements. You need to spend at least 1 action on this level, at least 1 of your action tokens on this level, and at least 1 action on this level of the pyramid, specifically right here also. Additionally, some power tiles will allow you to gain gold tokens, and some power tiles will allow you to spend or gain silver tokens. Now, the unique thing about these tokens is you're going to spend these tokens after you spend 1 of your regular action tokens, and they're going to be basically part of your round. So if you gain silver and gold tokens, you're not going to gain 6 and 7 action turns. Everybody always gets 5 actions every single turn. These are bonus actions you're going to take on your individual action round. So what that specifically means is if it's my turn and it's the very first action I'm going to take for the round, if I have a silver and a gold token, I could, as my very first action, raise up a level of my pyramid, and then as a second bonus action still on my turn, spend this silver token to go ahead and gain some power. Every other player may take some more turns, and it's going to come back to my turn. On my turn, I may choose just to spend 1 individual action token doing that action, and then every single other player is going to take some actions and come back to me again. Now it's come back to my turn again. I can, at this point, choose to spend 1 of my regular action tokens and then spend this gold action token right here at the top of the pyramid. Now, the interesting thing about the gold action tokens is every single gold action token is associated with a special power tile. And you only can use 1 special power tile per, or 1 gold special power tile per round, because you only have 1 room for it at the top of the board. But when it comes to the silver action tiles, you notice that you have multiple spaces on your board, so you can use multiple of the silver action discs to go along with your board. So just make sure you're not spending multiple gold action discs by hoarding all the gold action discs, because you really can only do 1 gold action disc per round. Not per turn, but actually per round. And I guess per turn is also the right way to say it. Now that you understand the core concepts for Kemet, let's go ahead and go over all the individual actions a player can take on a turn. So on your turn, the first action you can take, if you like, is you can spend 1 of your action discs and you can take the prayer action. Now, the nice thing is the prayer action is available twice to every single player on a round, and you're simply going to spend your action disc and you're going to gain 2 power. Now, the interesting thing about Kemet is there is an absolute maximum amount of prayer points that every single player can have on a turn. You can never have more than 11 prayer points, and you can never go below 0 prayer points. So that's the very first action you take on your turn, is basically spending an action token and gaining some prayer points. Now, there is one way to break this rule. There are some power tiles that if you gain that power tile, the prayer action is going to be actually more powerful for you. One of them allows your prayer action to actually gain you 3 prayer points just by taking the same action. So again, when I'm explaining the basic rules for the game, just understand there are going to be power tiles, there's going to be divine intervention cards that are going to break these rules. I'm just going to cover the basic rules and understand that going over every single individual power tile and every single divine intervention card is beyond the scope of this tutorial video, and it's going to be boring for me to do so because I'm not going to sit back here and read every individual power tile. It's going to be a good idea to go ahead and familiarize yourself with those power tiles. for two reasons. One is going to make your gameplay go a heck of a lot faster because you're not going to slow down the game to a grinding halt trying to learn the power tiles while you're trying to play with other players. And two, it's a really good way to make some good strategies for the game of Kemet. The next action a player can do on their turn is they can purchase a power tile. Now there's a couple of caveats to purchasing a power tile. The very first caveat to purchasing a power tile is you must have a pyramid of that color and of that level to buy that level of the power tile. Now you just have to currently control that pyramid. Understand that all your pyramids in your current starting city, you control them unless another player has moved in and taken the control of that pyramid away from you. But that also means that in a 3+ player game, if somebody takes your pyramid, you can also take it back by attacking their pyramid. And if you control another player's pyramid, you can buy those colors of power tiles as long as you hold control of that other player's pyramid. That's very, very important in a 5-player game where you have 4 different colors of powers available. And it's also very important at that point because you can temporarily gain access to powers that you don't currently control with your starting empire. Now the big caveat here is to purchase a power tile, you're simply going to take the action and you put your action disc down on the power of tiles that you currently have. Now, if you're playing a 5-player game, understand that there's potentially 4 different colors of pyramids that you can select. And if you're playing a 5-player game and you're buying a power tile that you currently do not have in your empire, you're going to simply pick one of the current active spots that you have available and you're simply going to take it to represent purchasing that power tile that you don't currently have the color for. For this early example in this 2-player game, we're simply going to make this nice and easy and we're going to place our action disc down here and purchase a blue power tile. Now to purchase a blue power tile, it's going to cost 1 point of power times the current level of the power. Now there's a level 1 power, 2, 3, and 4 power. And if you forget it, there's a nice reminder up there, left-hand corner of every one of these power tiles that signifies exactly how much power it costs to buy that power tile. The trick here is you can never buy a power tile higher than the level of that pyramid associated with the purchase of that power. So the start of the game, we see right here that red can purchase up to a level 2 power tile, but they can only purchase up to a level 1 power tile when it comes to black. If at later parts of the game we manage to elevate our pyramid all the way up to level 3, then we can now purchase up to level 3 power tiles simply because we now have control of a level 3 pyramid. Now if we level up our pyramid all the way up to level 4 and we signify that by simply flipping the top over, we now have access all the way up to level 4 power tiles. And as long as we have that pyramid we control in our city, we're good. But again, if somebody comes over and steals that power away from us, not only are we unable to make any more purchases of level 4 power tiles, our opponent can now do so even if they don't currently possess a level 4 pyramid themselves. So that's one of the interesting strategies of the game. Going out there and attacking other players' pyramids can give you extra incentive, extra power, and don't forget, just holding on to a level 4 pyramid is 1 temporary victory point. Now the interesting thing about power tiles is once you purchase a power tile, it's a permanent power immediately active in your empire, and nobody can steal power tiles away from other players. So understand that a lot of these power tiles are very unique, so it's a first come first served basis. If you're the first person to buy that power tile, there's a good chance that somebody else may not be able to gain that exact same power. Of course, when we look at the lower level powers, we do see that there are duplicates, but when we get to the higher level ones, they are all very unique and all very powerful. Not only that, some power tiles will also come with a monster. Now, monsters are never units, but they are always part of a troop. If you purchase a power tile with a monster, you're immediately going to add that monster to a current troop you have in your starting city. If you do not have any starting city troops at all because all your troops have moved out along the board, you can still buy the power tile, but this power tile is going to go into your empire here, waiting for you to summon a troop into your starting city. And the moment you summon a troop into your starting city, you may, as an option, spawn with that monster as part of your troop. The interesting thing about monsters, though, is that no troop can have more than one monster as part of that troop. And also understand that troops are not monsters, units are not monsters, monsters are not units, monsters are not troops. It's very specific in the terminology for the game. Monsters basically modify your troops, modify your units, and they join your armies, but they have to have a troop to be part of. If the last unit is wiped out of a troop, that monster is going to be unsummoned and returned to your empire player board until you again summon a troop, however many units you have in that troop, up to the current maximum depending on powers you may have, and that's the only time you bring that monster back into play. The next thing you can do on your turn is you can raise up the level of your pyramids. Now, raising up the level of a pyramid is an action to do so, and you can only do it once per round because you know there's only one spot for that on your entire player board. And to raise up the level of a pyramid, you're simply going to pay the cost of each level that you want to raise into. Now, even though you only get the action once per round, You can raise as many levels as you want and can afford, because each individual level you're going to raise into is a certain amount of power based on level you're trying to raise into. So if you're trying to build a pyramid and you currently don't have a pyramid of that color because you're playing a 3 or more player game and you decide to start with a level 2 and a level 1 pyramid, that does mean that to build that pyramid you're simply going to raise a level 1 pyramid, and that's going to cost you 1 point of power simply, and you simply add that into your empire and choose the color of that pyramid. Especially if you're playing a 5-player game, that can be very, very important. Now if you want to raise up a pyramid beyond that though, for example, if you want to go from a level 1 to a level 2, it's going to cost you 2 points of prayer power. To go to a level 2 to a level 3 is 3 points of prayer power. To go from a level 3 to a level 4 is going to be 4 points of prayer power. Now if you currently have enough prayer power though, that does mean that you can go all the way from a level 0 all the way up into the levels, or you can go from a level 1 all the way up to a level 4 pyramid by simply spending 2 to go to level 2, 3 more for a total of 5 to go to level 3, 4 more for a total of 9 to go all the way up to level 4. So a level 1 pyramid for 1 action and for a total of 9 power prayer points can go all the way from level 1 all the way up to level 4. Of course, this does mean that you can indeed go from a level 0 pyramid all the way up to a level 4 pyramid, but that's going to cost you a heck of a lot of power. 1 to go to level 1, 2 more for a total of 3 to go to 2, 3 more for a total, well, you can just do the math and figure out that it is possible if you have max prayer points. It is possible to go all the way up from a level 0 to a level 4 pyramid just by spending your 1 action, as long as you want to spend all the prayer points. The next action you do on your turn is going to be the recruit action. Now to recruit, you're going to recruit into your own city only. You cannot recruit into other player cities, even if you currently control an opponent's pyramid in an opponent's city. You can only recruit in your own city. And to recruit, you're simply going to take the recruit action and you're going to spend 1 prayer point for every unit you want to recruit. And since we only have 5 units in our reserve in this example, we're going to go all the way down from 9 all the way down to 4 power for our recruit action here. Now the interesting thing about taking the recruit action is you can place those units in any one of the districts of your city, as long as you're respecting the limits of no more than 5 for a troop, unless you have the special power that allows you to go beyond that. And yes, there is a power that allows you to go beyond 5 for every one of your troops. Once you've paid the prayer points and you've taken the action, you can decide in any one of the districts that you're going to spawn these units. The trick here is you can actually spawn your units in a location where your opponent happens to be, and if you do so, you are immediately going to trigger a battle. Now we're not going to cover battles and combats just yet, but just understand that you spend the total amount of prayer points you want for your recruit action, place those units anywhere in any one of the districts or cities, minding the fact that even if you control opponents' cities, you're not allowed to spawn in opponent cities. It's your city only. Next up we have the move action. Now the move action, again, you have 2 places that you can do the move action, but to take the move action, you're simply going to place 1 of your action tokens on the move action, and then you're going to pick 1 of your troops on the board and go ahead and move them. Now generally speaking, most troops can only move 1 space unless you happen to have any powers that can modify it, and yes, there are powers that can do that, such as monsters that can modify your movement, and there's also powers that just modify the movement for all the troops you have on the board. Now generally speaking, you can move from 1 unit area or 1 area to any single adjacent area. You can also move along these docks. Now the interesting thing about docks is any blue dock can lead to any blue dock on the board, as long as it's part of the board. Remember, in this 2-player game, this half of the Nile River doesn't exist, but if we're playing a multiple player game, just understand that multiple sections will start opening up and any blue dock can move to another blue dock. Additionally, any single red dock can also move to any blue dock. The trick here when it comes to the red docks though is you cannot move to a red dock unless that is a red dock in a city that you own, which means your basic starting city. So that does mean, for example, that blue, if they happen to have 2 points of movement, could not, as part of their action, go 1 point of movement, sail along the Nile River right here, and then gain access to this location right here via this dock. You can't go from a red to a red. But what you could do is you could have this unit who has 2 points of movement. They can move 1 point of movement here, spend another point of movement to move all the way down the river right here and end up at this location right here, going from a red dock to a blue dock, and that would actually start a combat. Now of course in this example you would require 2 points of movement to do so, but if you have the 2 points of movement, you could definitely do so. Now there's one little caveat to the movement rules of the game though. If you do not start the movement action with that troop next to a city, which basically means you have to be in this section right here, it doesn't matter how many points of movement you actually have, whether it's 3, 4, or 5 points of movement, you cannot move into a city unless you start your movement next to the city itself. Now there is one monster that allows you to break that rule, so understand, like I've said with most rules of this game, there are caveats to most of the rules of the game, but You can take your unit and move as many spaces as you want. Just understand that if you don't start next to a city, you cannot move into that city at all. Additionally, you can also take the teleport action. And the teleport action is part of the movement, and you can still move beyond the teleport action, which is the interesting thing about the teleport action. Now, to do the teleport action, you simply must start in your city where your pyramid is. You can only teleport from one of your pyramids, and you can go from there to any single location on the board that currently has an obelisk. The only caveat to that is you must spend 2 power to do so. Once you spend the 2 power, you simply do the Stargate Beam Me Up and pick one location that currently has an obelisk, and you move as many units as you want to that location. Additionally, understand that when it comes to movement, you can add units, you can drop off units, and you can actually move through an area exceeding the limit for a certain area as long as you don't stop in that area, breaking the rules for the maximum amount of units you can have for a troop. So what do I mean by that? That means that if I was to activate this unit as my movement action, I can move here as long as I don't end my movement in this location with these 3 units. Because if I do, I'm going to break the troop laws. But since I have a troop here of 3 and a troop here of 4, I could, if I have 2 points of movement, I could move 1 point of movement here, drop off a unit, and the other 2 units can continue my movement moving on right there, because I'm not breaking the limits for amount of a troop in a location. Additionally, with part of my movement, I can also pick up units from a troop as I move through. Again, as long as I have enough movement points, I can do so. So I can move here, if I have enough movement points, pick up 2 units to continue with me, and continue on to this location right here, all part of the movement action. And not only that, additionally, understand that teleporting is not the only thing you can do as part of your movement action. So for example, if I was at this location right here and I decided to spend the 2 prayer points to do a teleport action from my pyramid that I can control, I would teleport here if I wish as part of my action, and then I can still do my move action. Teleporting does not actually use up your movement, it can be part of your movement. And even adding one more wrinkle onto this just to make things even more a little bit interesting when it comes to the movement rules, you can always enter a city from outside your own city gates. So I could, if I wanted to, spend my 1 movement point to move into my city, spend 2 prayer points to go ahead and take a teleport action, and that teleport action could take me all the way over here, spending 1 movement action and only 1 point of movement. So there's an interesting ways that you mix up the movement actions. Just understand you can teleport from your own pyramids to any obelisk. You can move through locations as long as you don't forget to respect the troop maximums that are allowed for any location. And the final thing you understand is that if you move into a location with an enemy unit, you must stop your movement immediately and begin a battle. And heck, this is a great time. Let's go ahead and cover battle. So let's go ahead and do a battle example, because blue is sick and tired of red encroaching on their territory, and plus, hey, it's victory points. So let's go ahead and see how a battle exactly works. So for this example right here, it looks like blue is going to take a move action. And since they have the elephant with them, that does mean they get 2 points of movement. So they're going to move 1 space, and they're going to move 2 spaces right here, and they are going to take the elephant with them. Now the interesting thing is we could have actually moved here in 2 different ways. We could have spent the move action and simply moved 2 spaces like we did, or since we were at our pyramid, we could have also spent 2 power and teleport right there if we didn't have the elephant for the extra movement points. Just to give you examples and show you how the different strategies and different ways you can play the game. But just once you know how it can happen, but let's go ahead and move on with the actual battle right here. Once we have moved with 2 armies in the same area, the person who has moved into the area is going to be the attacker, and the other player who was there before, who was not their turn, is going to be the defender. Now in this unique example, let's not ignore the powers that some of our monsters actually have. This Sphinx right here actually has the power that anybody who moves into the space to attack this player must spend 1 power to do so. So once we've figured out any powers that may occur, and understand there's any conflicts or timing issues, it's always the attacker powers that activate first, then it's going to be the defender's powers. So now we've figured out any extra abilities, we're going to move into the War Council phase. For the War Council phase, every single player is going to look at their hand of battle cards, and they're going to choose 1 battle card that they're going to play as part of the combat, and they're going to choose another battle card that's going to be discarded face down, that no other player knows exactly what that card is, and no player can look at it except the player who controls that card, but they cannot gain that card back until they exhaust their entire hand of battle cards. So make sure when you're choosing your battle cards, you choose wisely, because the card you discard, you're not going to gain back until you go through your entire hand of battle cards. So for our mock combat right here, during the War Council phase, the blue player is going to play this card right here, and this is the card that's going to be part of the combat, and this is going to be their combat card. They're then going to look at their hand, and they're going to look at all their cards in their hand, and then they're going to discard one card face down. Again, that is the card that they will not gain access to until they go through the rest of their combat deck. Next, the other player is going to do the exact same thing. They're going to look at their entire hand of cards. They're going to pick one card they're going to play face down. That is going to be their combat card. And the rest of the cards they're going to place off to the side after discarding one of the combat cards. Again, that's also removed. Additionally, while the players are playing down their combat cards, they are more than welcome to also play Divine Intervention cards. And to play a Divine Intervention card, you are simply going to take that Divine Intervention card and you're going to place it underneath your battle card. You are not required to do so, but it's generally a good idea to do so, even if you're just going to simply play your diversion card, because it causes the other players to make some decisions and try to figure out exactly what they're doing. And it's also a really great way to bluff in this game. So you simply play the Divine Intervention card down, and once all the players are ready, we are now done with the War Council phase. Now we're going to go ahead and reveal both of the battle cards for both of our players. And this is going to happen during the confrontation phase. So for the confrontation phase, we're simply going to reveal that the red player has played this battle tactic right here, and then we are going to reveal that the blue player has played this battle tactic right here. Additionally, every single one of the players does have a Divine Intervention card that they also played below their cards, and they're also going to reveal their Divine Intervention cards. Now, if your Divine Intervention card does have a prayer cost associated with it, at this time you're definitely going to spend the prayer points. So blue in this case is going to spend 1 prayer point. And now we're simply going to move on to the resolution phase for this combat. So for the resolution phase, the only thing we care about, and this is the thing that gets a little bit confusing when you learn how to play Kemet, the only thing we care about at this point is total strength. To figure out your total strength, you're going to look for the total amount of these blades, and you're going to add it up, plus the total amount of units you have involved in this fight, plus any extra special abilities or anything you have along those lines. So in this perfect example right here, we're going to see that blue has 5 units, so they have a base of a 5 strength. Plus they play this card, which is going to add 2 more to the strength for a total of 7. And they also play this card for 2 more to the strength, so they now have a total of 9 strength. Additionally, if we look down at the power that we have for the elephant right here, we're going to see that the elephant also adds 1 more to their total attack strength. So now that we see that the blue player has a total of 10 strength for this battle. So now we're going to go over to the red player and we're going to figure out what their total strength happens to be. So for the red player, we see that they have 4 units as part of their army. We see that they played a card that has a total of 5 strength, so we're now at a total of 9 strength. They have the Sphinx, which is going to give them +1 to their total attack strength, so now we're at a total attack strength of 10. Plus they play this Divine Intervention card right here, which is a total strength of 11. Plus they currently have this power card right here, which is going to add +1 to the strength as long as they are the defender. Now for this power card specifically, you have to be the defender, and in this case red is definitely the defender. Now the nice thing about power cards is you don't pay their cost every single time you use them. Once you purchase them, they're part of your empire, unlike Divine Intervention cards, which you have to pay for every single time you use them. So let's go ahead and recap exactly what we have here. Blue has a total of 5 strength from units, +2 from the card for 7, +1 more for 8, +2 more from this combat Divine Intervention card here, which brings them to a total strength of 10. Over here for red, we have 4 units in the troop, so that's a total strength of 4, +5 more from this combat card, putting them at a total of 9, plus this one, which is going to be 10, plus this one, which is 11, plus this power, which is going to be 12. So when it comes to strength for both of our units, the defender is going to win the battle here when it comes to the strength only. Now understand also when it comes to ties, defender is always going to win ties. So for the attacker to win when it comes to strength, and that also means to win the fight, they need to have more strength total than the defender. Ties are always won by the defender. Now there's one more rule to add in here when it comes to strength. If you are defending your city and in your city only, you always add +1 to your strength. But since we're out in the field, we're going to ignore that rule. Just understand that is a rule in the game. Now that we figured out who the winner of this fight is, now we got to figure out casualties. And casualties and winner are not intertwined. They are totally separate results. So don't confuse when we get to this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look for any black blood drops. A black blood drop is an instant kill and there's no way to defend against it. So since the red player played this card with 2 black blood drops, that means they are immediately going to kill 2 of the blue units. So we're going to take these 2 blue units and they're going to be sent back to that player's board. And now we got to continue on figuring out the damage. Next thing we need to figure out is we're going to look for specifically for blood drops for any of our units based on the cards we happen to play, and those are going to be the kills that they possibly can perform based on the defense of the other player. And what I mean by that is we're simply going to add up the total amount of blood drops minus the total amount of shields for the opposing player, and that's the total amount of units that are going to be killed by that side. So let's go ahead and continue with red as the defender just to make this nice and easy. We're going to see out of all the cards we played here that red did not play any red blood drops at all. So they're not going to do any additional casualties to the blue player. Now the blue player though, we have 2 blood drops here, but we don't have any additional blood drops. So we're going to compare the 2 blood drops to however many shields the red player has, and they have 0 shields at all. So that means that since they have 0 shields at all, they're going to lose 2 more units. So that means that these 2 units are now going to be removed from the board and sent back to that player's storage. Now the last important thing to understand here about casualties is casualties do not influence who is the winner of the fight. We already know that red won the fight, so if somehow the card play had made red lose all their units, it does not matter, they were still the winner of the fight. If blue had somehow had more attack strength as the attacker, and if they managed to lose all of their units depending on the card play from the red player, they would still be the winner of the fight. Again, strength judges who is the winner. We're at the casualties point now. We've already figured out who the winner of the fight is. So now we've done all this. Now we're going to move on to figure out what the rewards are going to be from this specific fight. Now if the attacker is the winner of the fight, they're going to gain 1 permanent victory point. That's going to be added to the board if you are the attacker. Now again, Kemet incentivizes you to play aggressively and to go out there and attack other players. So if you are the attacker and you manage to win the fight by having more strength than the defender, and if you have at least 1 unit left remaining in the battlefield at that specific battle, you're going to gain 1 permanent victory point. But again, you have to win the fight. In our example right here, the attacker, which is blue, did not win the fight, so they are not going to gain that victory point. Next up, if the defender actually won the fight, they're going to gain a veteran token. Now, veteran tokens are great. They're going to be used during the night phase. And since in this case, the defender did happen to win the fight because they had the higher strength, they're going to gain 1 veteran token. Now, finally, any single player who did not gain a victory point is going to gain 1 veteran token. That does mean that even though the attacker lost in this fight, they're still going to get a veteran point token. It's kind of a nice kind of a sorry you lost, but at least you get something out of this. Now this does mean that if the defender actually wins the fight, they're going to gain 2 veteran tokens, which means that they're going to get a nice extra bonus because these veteran tokens can be used during the night phase. Now also understand that if in our example, if the attacker had actually won the fight, they would not get the veteran token. They only get the veteran token if they did not score any victory points for the battle. Now we move on to the loser's aftermath for the fight. So the loser needs to make a choice because remember in this game, no 2 separate armies can share the same space. So the loser needs to make a choice. They're either going to recall all their units that are left alive in that space, and when they recall all the units, that basically means those units they're dead. You're going to gain back prayer points based on the amount of units you recall minus 1. So that means if we recall 3 of our units, we would gain 2 prayer points. If you only have 1 unit left over, recalling means that you're not getting any prayer points because it's going to be a minus 1. The other option you have is you can decide to retreat to another area where there is not an opponent's army at all. If there is no places to retreat to because enemies are surrounding you on all sides, then you are forced to recall. You do not get a choice. And again, that recall is going to be a gain of prayer points based on the amount of units recalled minus 1. After the loser has made this decision whether they're going to recall or retreat, it's now time for the winner of the fight to make that choice. Remember, the loser has to make that choice first, and now it's the chance for the winner to do the exact same thing. And if the winner of the battle does decide to recall, they have to follow the same rules as the loser of the fight, meaning that if we recalled both of our units, we'd only gain 1 prayer point because it's the amount of units recalled minus 1. And of course, if you had any monsters with that, they would also be removed from the board and they return back to your supply, waiting for you to do a recruit action again. And when you do a later recruit action, you can add that monster back onto your board into your city. At this point, players are going to go ahead and discard any cards they use in this fight, whether it was battle cards or divine intervention cards. Divine intervention cards are going to be simply sent to the discard pile. Any battle cards the players played in the fight, again, not the discarded one before the fight started, but the battle cards that were played are going to be discarded face up. And that does mean that this is known knowledge to all the players on the board. The card that is discarded face down, nobody knows what it is, but the card that you discard face up, it is definitely known by all the players, and that's also part of the strategy of the game. I'm not going to say that you're going to be card counting in this game, but oh yes, you're going to be card counting a little bit, especially when you see your player across from you plays that 5 strength, 2 black blood drops card. you know that card is not in their hand, and that can affect your strategies. So watch the cards they're discarding face up, but remember the card that is face down, nobody gets to look at it until that player has discarded their last battle card, and they're going to take all 8 of their battle cards back into their hand. Do note though, the Distraction Divine Intervention card is never discarded into the discard pile. If you did play the Distraction Divine Intervention card, you're actually going to take it back into your hand, which means that every single player has at least one Divine Intervention card at all times. And when you're playing Divine Intervention cards, especially in combat, you don't need to be honest about them at all. You can play multiple Divine Intervention cards. You can lie and say that you're playing multiples. You can just play none, whatever you want to do. Just remember, only the spent Divine Intervention cards go to the discard pile as long as it's not your distraction. Your distraction card goes right back to your hand. Now, that is all the actions that are available during the day phase, so let's go ahead and look at the night phase. Now again, the night phase is only going to occur once all players have spent their last action token. Once all the players have spent their last action token, the day phase is over, we now get to go to the night phase. So the night phase is going to occur in a very specific order, and we're going to occur like this every single time. Once that night phase is over, we're going to go right back to the day phase. Again, we're looking for one player to start their turn with 9 victory points to go ahead and win the game. So the very first thing we're going to do during the night phase is we're going to see if any single player currently has at least 2 units in the Sanctuary of All Gods. If a player has at least 2 units in the Sanctuary of All Gods, that player and that player only can decide to sacrifice those 2 units. And again, if they have more than 2 units, you only need to sacrifice 2 units. So if we happen to have 4 units here, we're simply going to discard 2 of those units, and by the divine favor, we are going to gain 1 permanent victory point, and that cannot be taken away from us. After we've figured out the Sanctuary of the All Gods, we're going to see if any player happens to have any units, or I should say a troop, at the Delta Temple. Now, if you have a troop at the Delta Temple, you may decide to discard, sacrifice 1 of your units, and that's going to go ahead and give you 5 prayer points. Now again, don't forget, in this game you can never have more than 11 prayer points, so make sure you're making smart decisions when it comes to making those sacrifices. And also understand that if your troop happens to be at any one of the temples, that's 1 temporary victory point you also control for your empire. These are temporary victory points though, and it's going to be very important to see something in just one moment, because this could potentially turn into permanent victory points, and I'll show you exactly how that works in just 1 second. After we've taken care of the Delta Temple, it's now time to figure out if any single player controls at least 2 temples. If any single player controls at least 2 temples, that player is going to gain 1 permanent victory point, and they're going to add that to the victory point track here. And again, permanent victory points cannot be taken away. So as long as a player controls at least 2 temples every single round, they're going to be gaining 1 permanent victory point every single round during the night phase. So watch out way that goes when you're playing this game with players, because somebody can very easily keep garnering victory points. And remember, controlling these temples is also temporary victory points, so that also starts compiling, can work towards that victory. And now we get to the adoration phase. During the adoration phase, every single player is going to gain a certain amount of prayer points based on the temples that they control. Now, if a temple is not controlled by anybody, that temple is not going to provide any prayer points to any player at all. But if you happen to control multiple temples, you're going to gain multiple allotments of prayer points. And again, you're just going to simply add it up. So in this example right here, we would see that the red player would gain 5 prayer points. The status of the board was just a little bit different, and it looks something like this. We would say that red would gain 2 prayer points, and then the blue player would gain 3 prayer points. And we also would adjust the victory points right there, because it would look just a little bit different. And in this case, blue would have gained 1 permanent prayer point, or 1 permanent victory point, because they actually, in this example, control 2 temples. The important thing to understand here, though, is that the Delta Temple only provides prayer points if you make the sacrifice. These other temples do not require a sacrifice, but they also provide less prayer points. That's the big difference. Now we get to the prayer segment of the night phase, and during the prayer segment, every single player is going to gain 2 prayer points. It doesn't matter where they are on the board, what they control, or anything like that. But do remember, you have to respect the limits for every single one in Empire. No Empire can ever have more than 11 prayer points. On top of that, if you happen to have any veteran tokens, at this point, you can discard as many veteran tokens as you currently possess for that many extra prayer points. Now, you don't have to do it, because these veteran tokens do have additional uses you can use, especially on the next step, which is the Divine Intervention step. During the Divine Intervention step, every single player is going to gain 1 Divine Intervention card. And at this time, again, in player order, players can decide to discard veteran tokens, and for every veteran token they discard, they're going to gain 1 extra Divine Intervention card. If you do not do so, we finally get to go to the conscription step, and during the conscription step, players can again discard veteran tokens to add units onto the board in their cities. Now the trick here is if we have not spent our veteran tokens by the end of the conscription step, any veteran tokens not spent are going to be lost. So make sure you're spending your veteran tokens either for prayer, for divine intervention, or for using for conscription, because by the time we get to the end of the conscription phase of the night phase, if you have not done so, you're going to lose all those veteran tokens. So make sure you spend them or you're going to lose them. Now we got to go to the awaken phase where all the players are simply going to reset all their action tokens. And then we are going to move on to the destiny phase. Now for the destiny phase, players in order of who currently has the least amount of power are going to decide in what order they wish to act in the following round. And the nice thing about this part of the phase is every single player gets to choose what order they want to go in. But again, we're going to figure this out in order of fewest victory points, and we're going to go in ascending order from there. It's not in the prior turn's order. It's basically based on the current amount of victory points every single player has. Now, if there's ever a tie for victory points like we have in this example, we're going to figure out in the current player order. And that's why we move these turn order tokens down off the turn order track just a little bit, so the players can decide how they want to do this. So in this example, we see that both of our scores are tied. So that means blue gets to decide first if they want to be the first player or if they want to be the second player. But let's say we happen to be playing a 3-player game in this example just to demonstrate exactly how this part of the game phase works. In this case, we would see that we're having a 3-player game where yellow is involved in this, and we see that yellow currently has 0 victory points. So yellow can decide that in the following round they can want to go first, second, or third. In this case, let's say they decide that they want to go second. Now we're going to figure out, since we have a tie between red and blue, blue is going to break the tie in their favor because they're currently going earlier in the turn order, and now they get to decide exactly which order they want to go in the next round. Let's say blue decides that they want to watch exactly what red is going to be doing in the following round. So they are going to decide that they want to be the third player in the following round, and that means it comes to red finally, who has no choice but be the first player in the following round. There's only a couple rules to understand about the game of Kemet. I basically explained to you how the entire flow of the game goes, but there's a couple extra concepts to understand when it comes to the game of Kemet. The first concept to understand is no player can have the same power tile twice. So if you have any power tile that has the same artwork on it, only one copy of that power tile will be in your empire during the entire game. So to emphasize this, red could not go ahead and decide to buy this power tile and also this power tile because they are the exact same power tile. They can only buy one copy of it. So it does mean in a 2-player game, everybody has a lot of options, but in a 5-player game, we're only going to see 2 copies of every power tile. That means the options are going to be a lot more restricted for all the other players. Additionally, you have no limit to the amount of divine intervention cards you can keep in your hand at any one time. But the amount of cards you have in your hand are always known knowledge to other players. So a player can literally look at you across the table and say, how many battle casualties do you have left in your hand? How many divine intervention cards do you have left in your hand? You don't have to show what the cards are, but you do have to give an honest count back to the player. And then the final thing to understand is controlling a zone. If a zone is your city, it doesn't matter if you have units in it or if you don't have units in it, you always control your city. Any zone that does not have any units in it, besides for a city zone, is going to be a free zone. And any zone that happens to have your units in it only, and only your units can be in it, because if not, well, you got to battle then. But any units that are in a zone means that you control that zone. So basically that means that you always control your city unless another player happens to be making your life a little bit difficult, and you always control any zone where you currently have your units. So that's a full tutorial for the game of Kemet. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I'll be sure to get to them as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me off the shelf board game reviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. Be sure to answer your email as quickly as I can. If you enjoy the channel, if you enjoy the content, think about supporting the channel over on Patreon. I basically run this channel on the honor system. I don't run any gimmicks. I don't run any Kickstarters. Basically, I'm looking for the support of all of you out there. And if you enjoy the content and I've helped you spend your gaming dollars wisely, think about tossing $1 in the tip jar over at Patreon at patreon.com/OTSBGR. If you enjoy this video series, click that like button, click that subscribe button. Your subscriptions always matter here. And as always, thanks for watching.